Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I am Carmen McDonald. I'm the Director of Education for UXPA International, and I'll be the moderator for our panel discussion today. We're super excited to be joined by this awesome panel of UX professionals. But before we jump right in, there are a few items to note. I'm going to go ahead and kind of share my screen. And so the one thing that I want to note is that we do have an upcoming UXPA International Conference in Scottsdale, so be sure to go to uxpa2019.org and register for that. Also, the webinar is going to be recorded and it will be made available at the conclusion of our talk. We do have an upcoming webinar in April, April 12th to be exact, and it's Common AI and Ethics Challenges and How to Solve Them, and that will be led by Ovetta Sampson of IDEO. Lastly, be sure to check our website for more information. Be sure to check our website for more information on our upcoming panels and short courses. Thank you guys for joining us today. We're going to go around and kind of talk to our panelists. So here. And we can start with Jen. So Jen, just start by telling us who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your career journey in life in academia.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to do this. We all did a similar panel presentation at the UXPA conference, and it was a lot of fun, so it's great to see you all too. So yeah, I'm Ramona Bergstrom. I currently lead UX research at Bridgewater Associates. My path here has been, I call it kind of zigzaggy. I didn't know, when I was starting off way back when that I was, oops, I could see your desktop. I don't know if that's the intent, Carm. There we go. So yeah, when I started off, I didn't know about usability. I didn't know about UX. I went to school for psychology. Actually, I originally went for business because I liked business, and then stumbled on psychology and really liked understanding human behavior and why people are the way they are. And that really became what I was passionate about. And then I stumbled into UX. At the time it was usability, when I did an internship in grad school at the US Census Bureau. And at the time I didn't even know what it was, but the job description talked about conducting research with humans and designing studies, carrying out studies, presenting findings to stakeholders, writing up studies or writing up findings. And these were things that I had done a lot in undergrad and grad school, but just with a different subject matter. I had studied cognitive aging and things like that, but I knew I could do these things well. So I went for it, and that led me down a completely different path. Spent some time at the Census Bureau, learned all about usability, forms and survey design and evaluation. That's where I learned about eye tracking, and now those two things have really become niches of mine. From there, I went on to, I was in the DC area, went on to a research firm, and I started a UX team at Forrest Marsh Group. And that's where I started working with other types of clients, still a lot of government being in DC, but also some commercial clients. After that, I went out to California for Facebook, worked at Facebook out in California for a year, and moved out to New York, continued working at Facebook, and then Instagram. And then from there, I moved on to Bridgewater, where I am now. They found me and liked my background, including my academic background. And recruited me, and I'm leading a team there now. So it wasn't quite a, I was a professor and then moved into industry. It was more, I had a really academic passion and interest, when I went to grad school and got a PhD, and I love the rigorous research. I still do, and I love to collaborate with academics, and I still like to publish. I still kind of have my hand in academia, but I'm obviously primarily industry.
Okay, great. Let's go and move on to Amy.
Hi, my name is Amy Bucher. I currently work at MadPow as a behavior change design director. So MadPow is a strategic design consultancy. We have offices in Boston, where I live, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And we work with healthcare companies, financial services companies, and then we have a pillar that we call social good, which tends to be things like education, sustainability, purpose-driven sorts of projects. So kind of similar to Jen, I actually really loved my academic training. I earned my PhD at the University of Michigan. I had studied psychology as an undergraduate and just adored it, but couldn't figure out a good career path for just a bachelor's degree in psychology. So I had a mentor at the time who recommended I go to grad school. She felt like I had strong research skills and would do well there. And so I went to Michigan. And I really loved a lot of the aspects of academia. I loved the research as well. I loved teaching and communicating about the information that I was learning. What wasn't really a strong fit for me is how much of a specialist you often become in academia. So there was, at least in grad school, the way that we were trained is that you would find this very specific niche in research that you wanted to make your own. And you'd focus all of your research there and build up this story about how you were the world expert in this topic. And that wasn't really what got me going. That wasn't what made me feel passionate. I like knowing about a lot of different things. I like using different sorts of methods to answer questions, and I like variety in my days and my weeks and my months. So I was realizing that while I liked the activities, the way that they are structured in academia wasn't going to be a good fit for me. And then at the same time, with my personal life, I was realizing I wanted to have control over where geographically I lived, which you don't always get on the academic job market. So between those two factors, I really emphasized non-academic jobs after graduation. I ended up doing research at first for an agency that does like sales support for pharmaceutical companies. So I liked the research, I liked being in health, didn't really feel like that combination was quite the right fit. And after that, I was very lucky to get a job with a startup that was doing digital health. And, I was able to really get into the UX world that way. So in that job, we were directly building products. I was able to do research and then connect the research to design implications, which is what I love. Like that's really what gets me going. So, and again, very lucky. I don't know that I knew that it was going to end up being a UX career path at that point, but once I stumbled on that, that was it. Like that was what I was going to do. And so that company was acquired by Johnson & Johnson. They're actually still actively building an in-house behavior science capability. So those of you who are out there who do behavior science type stuff and you're looking for an industry position, I would highly recommend looking at Johnson & Johnson or companies like that that are starting to realize the value that behavior change can bring to what they offer their consumers. And, I worked there for about 7 years. And then again, just personal life geography, ended up here in Boston where I'm at MadPow. And I've been very happy with it because I do get that variety I crave working in the agency format.
Cool. So moving on to Elizabeth.
Hey everybody, my name is Elizabeth. I live up in Toronto, Canada. I got a PhD in cognitive psychology 6 years ago from the University of Chicago, and I had a bit of a crisis about 6 months before I finished where I thought the whole time that I wanted to be a professor and stay in academia and all that kind of stuff, and then I decided definitely not. And I think I just started Googling what else I could do, and I somehow came across UX and UX research, and it seemed like a pretty good fit for someone who loved research but didn't necessarily want to do it in an academic setting. I got my first job at a small UX research consultancy in the Chicago area called Centralis. That was really, really helpful for me because I had a lot of research skills as a grad student, but I didn't have the kind of more practical UX specific experience. And so that was a great experience learning all that stuff. And after a couple of years there, I moved to San Francisco. Worked at a startup out there, learned about what it's like to be the only researcher and working at a startup, which is like a whole different world. And then I moved back to Toronto, worked for Shopify for a couple of years, which is one of the biggest tech companies in Toronto, at least, leading a team there. And I quit about a year and a half ago to start my own thing. So right now I run a UX research consultancy called Brazen. We do all sorts of UX research and strategy and training for clients in Toronto, but also like across the United States and elsewhere. And I am loving it. It's been the best decision I've made in my life so far. And certainly At this point, having a PhD is really helpful because it gives me credibility. I think those letters give me credibility that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So that's probably been the most valuable aspect of having a PhD for me so far.
Great, thanks for sharing. And last but definitely not least, we have Becca.
Hi, everyone. My name is Becca Kennedy. I live in Albany, New York, which is where I am from. So I went to college at a New York State school, majored in psychology and sociology, and minored in French. So it was very liberal artsy, but started doing psychology research in the psychology department and liked that. I knew I didn't want to do anything clinical. I knew I wanted to help people, which I think is a huge thing for a lot of psychology majors. Is like, I just want to get out there in the world and help people. So eventually my senior year, I learned of a field called human factors psychology. And without knowing a whole lot about it, decided to apply to PhD programs. So human factors psychology is basically the study of how humans interact with technology or interact with systems, and how to use information about what we know about the way people think and behave to design those things better. So in short, it's user experience, but a lot more academic. So I luckily was accepted to a program at Old Dominion University. So I moved to Norfolk, Virginia, where I did my PhD. And I was doing a lot of research in healthcare. So specifically using technology to train surgeons or to train other healthcare practitioners. I knew I didn't want to stay in academia. So unlike maybe Elizabeth, my crisis happened like immediately. Although I'm sure we've all had like multiple crises, but and I think around my second year of my PhD program, I discovered user experience. So this was probably around 2011, 2012, when it was really starting to kick off and become popular. So while I was finishing my PhD in human factors, I was kind of like staying involved with UX stuff and going to meetups as I could or conferences as I could and learning the terminology a little bit. So before I finished my dissertation, I actually moved from Norfolk back to Albany, where I'm from, for personal reasons, and decided this is where I was going to stay. So being that there aren't a lot of human factors or user experience jobs here, I started a company in 2015 called Kennison. So I have been doing user experience consulting and a little bit of human factors too. Since then, in a lot of different domains. And like I think Amy said, something that I didn't like so much about academia also was the specialization. Like I love just like learning new things and doing completely different things all the time. And it feels like you're starting from scratch every time, but I love it. And that's why I kind of became a consultant. And like Elizabeth said, having that PhD, which I did eventually finish, adds credibility to who I am, right? To set yourself apart a little bit from everyone else who says they do UX. You know, what does that mean? Well, you know, I have like all of this experience to back it up. So that's kind of been my path.
Absolutely. And this is really interesting because what I'm hearing, again, from like Amy, Elizabeth, Becca, you guys talk a little bit more about specialization. Can you tell us a little bit more about like how specialization in academia works for anybody or any of our members? I know I'm curious. You know, I don't have those letters, so I'm curious as to how specialization in academia works and then how that transition was made for UX.
Yeah, I think it's actually more a function of the way the academic job market works than the training per se. Because when you go out and you're applying for these very limited faculty roles, oftentimes universities are looking for somebody who may become like the world superstar in a particular area, who can attract funding to the university. And competition for funding sometimes depends on being able to do something very specific. And so students wanting ultimately to get into those roles start to specialize, are guided to specialize. But I think there's two areas where it happens, and one is the types of research methods that you use. So University of Michigan, at least at the time I was there, I graduated in 2006. The psychology program was known to be a very strong quantitative psychology program with really strong laboratory experimentation methods. So a lot of the people who graduated around the time I did have really rigorous training in those sorts of methods specifically, and will often, like you'll see that same method replicating in the research that they publish. And then the second place where specialization happens is in the topic that you study. So instead of studying something broad like motivation, I do a lot of work with motivation, but that actually is very, very, very broad. You might start to get all the way down into like mediators of the relationship between competency support and academic performance in adolescence in New Zealand, like a really specific, target population and mechanism of action. So that's kind of what I mean by that.
Okay. Great. Anyone else want to jump in or comment, Becca?
Yeah, just to add to that, and every program is also different. So just speaking on my own program, your dissertation, the purpose of that is to kind of set yourself up as an expert in one specific thing. So you are the world's expert in whatever that really specific thing is, which is like really fun and cool, honestly. Like now that it's over, I can say that a little better than I could while I was in the middle of it. But at the same time, like you're looking at the same research, looking at the same literature for, in my case, it took me 4 years to do my dissertation. So by the end of that, I was like, no more of this. I'm working with tech startups now, that kind of thing. So it's good and bad.
Okay. Interesting. So knowing that the PhD and these specializations are kind of the expected, like how do you go from getting that and earning that and then transitioning into a career and specifically UX? So if you could kind of tell me about that transition. I know Amy mentioned earlier, like she had a mentor, and we'll kind of get into some questions about that. But maybe Jen, if you can start us off, like just tell us how, going from, that PhD and this specialization and kind of using those skills and transferring those into an industry career in UX. If you could tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah, for me, it's not that I had like a specific person who guided me in that direction. As I mentioned, when I first went to school, I was interested in business, so I've always had this interest in business. And I think I was very lucky that this internship posting was going around my department. So I was in the applied experimental department, but we also had, or program, applied experimental psych program, but we also had, I think it was a human factors program. So I think that's who that internship posting was for. I don't think it was for me because people in my program and, I don't know, most of my peers from even other universities, like at that time, they were on an academic track. And I thought I was on an academic track. I thought I was going to go and do an academic postdoc and become a professor. And I saw that posting and I was just like, oh, this is really interesting. And I had participated in a couple studies that the human factors students were doing. That had never clicked. It was more like virtual reality kind of stuff. And, it was interesting to be a participant, but I never had that feeling of like, I want to do this as a career. I don't know what it was about that posting. I mean, I guess the Census Bureau writes good internship postings because it was that posting that like kind of grabbed me. I was like, this seems really interesting and I want to check this out, and when I talked, when I talked to my advisor about it, and at the time I was also applying to postdocs, more traditional academic postdocs. When I talked to him about it, he was like, I think this would be good for you. But, I brought it to him. It's not like he like pushed me in any sort of direction. So I think I was lucky and, of course it's not all luck. I was lucky and, what's the word? Like I take chances in life. You know what I mean? Like I'm the kind of person who's like, that seems interesting. I know nothing about hang gliding. I'm going to go try it anyway.
Nope.
Personality. So the word's not coming to mind, but you know what I mean? Like I had a combination of like luck when this was passing by my plate or my email and just the kind of personality where it's like, I'm going to give this a shot. What's the worst that can happen? I end up doing an academic postdoc anyway. Like I was willing to give that a shot. So yeah, that's what happened in my situation. And, I talk to a lot of people who are interested in getting into the field and I push that. It's like, just try it. If there's something you're interested in, like you don't have to know everything. You're looking at a resume. You might be like, I don't fit every single thing that's in this description, not a resume, sorry, a job posting. I don't fit every single line. That's okay. Like try it anyway. You never know exactly who they're looking for. Like maybe everybody who's applying doesn't fit every single thing that's on that job description. You know, you might really click with the people that you're interviewing with. Like, you never know your background. Some of my graduate work was on visual perception and in cognition. And I was able, in my interview at the Census Bureau, I was able to talk about that. It's so unrelated, I think. I mean, maybe now I should, you know, maybe it's a little bit more related, but now like I do eye tracking, like maybe it is a little bit more related, like where items are located on the screen and what is capturing people's attention. I was studying that in a very cognitive way in grad school, not at all related to interfaces and how people interact with interfaces, but I was able to take like that one study and somehow talk about how that might sort of be related. And you know, it worked. Like, you never know the experiences you have, you know, part of a problem people have oftentimes is like translating that research they've done. You know, you've done a lot of research. You've done years of research, writing your dissertation, working on your dissertation, all the studies that came before that. Like, you've got so much experience conducting really good research. So like figuring out how to take that information and translate it can help get you into the UX field, because that's what we're doing, right? We're doing research, maybe in a different subject domain, but that's what we're doing. And having, you know, you guys alluded to having the PhD after your name gives you credibility. It certainly does. Like, that means you know how to do research, which is really important. You know, arguably more important than knowing precisely how to do usability testing or UX research. Somebody can teach you how to do that, but if you know how to do really good research, that's more valuable, I think.
And yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you said that, Jen. I'll come back to that. But Elizabeth, I think you wanted to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, like adding on to that. So not only, you know, so we specialize in some very, very tiny thing, but we learn all these very generalizable research skills, and we also learn like how to write well, like how to speak about our research, how to convince people of things. Like, those are really, really important skills. And I feel like, I mean, so I also studied visual perception and cognition and stuff. And I feel like when I tell people that, they're like, oh, that must be so related to what you do now because you study, you know, how people consume information and look at websites and whatever. And I'm like, yeah, it is related, but I feel like I don't use that knowledge that much. Most of what I use is the very, like, the kind of soft skills stuff and like the more generalizable stuff. And even just like being able to like look at a whole bunch of data and know what approaches to take to analyze it, or know what research approaches to take to solve a particular problem, right? Like, yeah, I mean, I feel like I was really worried starting outside of academia that it would take me a long time to pick up the UX specific stuff, but I found that I had such a good foundation from my PhD that learning the like specific ins and outs of doing UX research was not a big deal because I already had the hardest things to learn like already down pat.
Yeah, and I think psychologically speaking, one of the things that happens in a PhD program, or I'll speak for myself, for me, it's a very like self-confidence hard. It's a hard time with respect to your self-confidence because you almost get like torn down and rebuilt. You're learning all these really hard skills. You're spending, you know, I was in my program for 5 years. That's a long time. It's longer than I spent on my undergrad degree. And you know, you're learning so much in a way that you know, just really left me kind of like emotionally raw. And that sounds worse than I mean it to be. But I think that the positive output of that is now in a work situation when I'm just embarking on a new project and it's really complicated and I'm not sure how it's going to go or how to tackle it. I've developed a comfort with that psychological uncertainty because I know that I know how to navigate through it. So, you know, I think having developed that mindset through the process of getting a PhD actually ended up being a really professionally valuable thing. I guess it's not quite a skill, but I don't feel a sense of panic when I'm presented with a body of work to tackle and I'm not sure how to do it because I know that I will figure it out.
And one tiny point to add related to all of this is that we did talk about like having the PhD after your name being awesome. If you are in grad school and you decide not to finish your PhD, that is also fine, and you still have a lot of experience that you can transfer into industry. So that was something that I was worried about when I had considered multiple times, like, do I want to finish this or not? Like, that's very normal to go through that and to decide either way, honestly. One way is not better than the other. And whether or not you actually finish your degree, it doesn't always matter so much. You still have those skills and you can still point to all that experience you have.
Great. So it sounds like, having your PhD or having that research background just in general kind of really sets you up and prepares you for UX. So just curious, it looks like UX is one of those things that was just kind of happened upon. It seems like in most of the cases, even with you guys, like you just happened upon it, or maybe someone introduced you to it, and then you were able to kind of make that transition. Is UX an industry that we're seeing a lot of researchers transition to? Is that one of the more popular industries, or are there other industries that we see researchers gravitating towards?
So for me, I think part of the reason it was so accidental for me is because I finished my degree in 2006. Before UX, I think, had as much, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but in terms of UX and where the state of that industry is, I think it really was a long time ago. So I think that today's graduates are going to find a lot more well-defined opportunities for both UX research generally and then behavior change research and UX more specifically. I can say that among my peers who went for non-academic jobs, so in my PhD, this is an important thing to know here, is in organizational psychology, so business psychology. So some of my peers work in human resources departments doing like people analytics type things, so working with large data sets, trying to figure out what drives good employee performance, what type of training might be appropriate, how do you structure performance plans and that kind of thing. So there's that. A lot of data-driven stuff, so we're not necessarily conducting the research to gather the data, but then taking those data sets and making meaning of them for other teams in a company.
Anyone else want to?
Just in terms of like when I think about the other people who are in my like PhD cohort and what they've gone on to do, like obviously some of them stayed in academia, but other than UX and human factors, a lot of people moved on to like market research, for example, or some actually did like a coding boot camp or something and learned how to be a developer instead. I mean, anything with like an analytical mind, I guess, is something that we could fit in with as well. And like in terms of UX research as a field, whether it's good to go into or not, I feel like it's growing so much. I feel like when I think about when I worked at Shopify, when I started, I was the 10th person on the research team, which is a lot of researchers for a lot of companies to have. And then by the time I left, now they have more than 50, which is crazy. And when I think about the clients that I speak to, I find that I'm in a position now where I feel like I get a lot of work because a lot of companies are just starting to get into research. So they hire people like me to do like single projects or whatever. But I also am in this situation where I have some clients who I maybe have worked with for a while, and they've actually kind of graduated to the point where they can hire their own in-house researcher. And so I kind of have these clients where they might not need me so much anymore because they're actually getting to the point where they can support a real, in-house researcher, which is like just another good sign of the field growing, I think.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention the kind of the flip side of what you asked, Carm. PhDs in, sorry, not just PhDs, but I guess that's our kind of focus here, but people come into UX from all different disciplines, right? So when I was at Facebook, I worked with people with anthropology backgrounds and ethnography backgrounds and, different types of social sciences, as well as the people who are coming in from design and, other fields that maybe seem a little bit more closely related. But yeah, people are really coming in from all different backgrounds. It's really exciting. And I like to work with really well-rounded teams, like if we all work together, I think we would, we'd kill it, but we all have like psychology backgrounds, you know what I mean? Like, it's really nice to get a team together who have all these different backgrounds, different areas of expertise, who have done their their many, many years of research on something else that's completely unrelated to what I studied, because then you approach problems differently, so it's kind of going in both ways. Like people with PhDs in psychology, there's different paths, but then also coming into UX, it's a really cool time for our field because people are really coming in from all different backgrounds.
Yeah, I would definitely agree there. I would say the next question, and I know this is a question that had come from a few of our members about mentorship. So anytime you're trying to make a transition into UX specifically, do you have any advice about seeking mentorship or anyone who could possibly help make the transition from academia to industry?
For me, my most effective mentors at that time were outside of academia. I had a really supportive undergraduate mentor who helped me with deciding to go to grad school and then selecting a grad program that fit my interests. But when I made the decision to go non-academic, my school advisors were just not equipped to really help me with that. It wasn't something that they had a lot of experience with. And so I found myself a little bit on my own. But what I did find as soon as I got out into the job market and got my first few jobs was that I just had to think differently about who could be a mentor. So it's not even necessarily somebody more senior than me. And I would say now some of the people I learn the most from are not more senior than me, but it's people who have different skill sets or knowledge from me, who are willing to share that, who understand what I bring to the table and are interested in helping me build on it. I think that attitude is actually the most important thing I look for in a mentor, is somebody who respects what I bring, but also sees the opportunity to help me learn and grow that. I've had some people that I've sought as mentors who I think didn't agree with the way that I had been trained or with some of the things that I wanted to do, and took a more combative approach to it. And I found that that doesn't work well for me. That ultimately doesn't end up being a growth relationship for me. But you know, I can remember even when I first started at the startup where I really first started doing UX and feeling really overwhelmed initially by some of the more technology development aspects that I'd never like coded anything before. I didn't know the names for all the different parts of a web interface, and I needed to know that stuff pretty quickly. And I felt dumb, like I wanted to know this stuff. And I remember one of the other women who was on a team that I worked with a lot, like spent time with me just one-on-one, like walking me through screenshots of our program, saying like, you know, this is the header, this is the navigational menu, like this is how this is a hamburger menu. It was very basic stuff, and she never made me feel like I was lacking because I needed her help with it. And I consider her a mentor. Like that was a really helpful way that she helped me expand my skills and bring them into this new area.
Great.
Also, I'd recommend, I mean, if you're looking for mentors and you don't really know where to start, there's like organizations that could potentially help you. Like in Toronto, there's one called Hexagon UX, and it's for women specifically. And I'm involved in that as a mentor. And so you could look and see if there's any local groups that would offer that sort of thing. I also, like, as someone who's often on the other end, like as on the mentor end versus the mentee end these days sometimes, just like when you reach out to these people, just keep in mind that they're busy, they might take a long time to get back to you. Don't be offended if that happens. And that when you write to them, just try to be really specific about what you're looking for. Like you don't need to write an essay, but make it easy for the person to understand whether they'll be able to help you, basically, and how they can help you. That's always really helpful. It's harder when you get like a long, vague email and you don't really know what they're looking for and how to act on it to help them.
Yeah, I agree. I just to give a plug to UXPA, we have a mentorship program that is in progress right now, and some of the chapters also have programs. So like if you wanted something more local where you can meet people in person, it's a great way to try to find those mentorship programs. There are a lot now because there are so many people who want to get into the field and are looking for some sort of guidance. So if you just like poke around a little bit or reach out to any of us, you'll find someone. And yeah, I agree with Elizabeth. Be really specific. I do mentorship. I do coaching on the side, and usually I start off the session just by saying, "All right, what's up? Like, tell me a bit about yourself. What's going on?" And people just jump right in and talk about where they are and what they're interested in accomplishing. And that really helps me to figure out where they are and what we can work together on. Some people want to work on their resume. Some people want to identify companies. Some people want to identify holes in their research background. So be really specific about what it is you're interested in. And then the other thing is, in terms of like finding the right people to talk to, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking about, Amy, like finding the wrong people to talk to. If you find people, whether it be like right now, so you already have 4 people here who have PhDs and are in UX, or 5. Carm, do you?
Oh, no, I don't have a PhD. No.
Okay, so 4 people, right? Here's 4 already. You'll see other people, whether it's at a conference, somebody who's giving a talk, or on another webinar, or you read a magazine article, or you're corresponding with somebody and you see it in their signature line, right? Like you'll see other people who have a background. Look people up on LinkedIn, right? Like you'll find people, just reach out to people and ask them if you can chat with them. again, like Elizabeth said, they're super busy. People are busy and they might get a lot of requests. So be mindful of that. Ask for 15 minutes. Like, can I just have 15 minutes of your time? I'd love to pick your brain. Here's where I'm at. Like, I have my degree and I've been doing research for years, but it's not in UX and I really want to get into UX. Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? People are pretty open in our field, as most of like our field is full of really friendly people. So, usually people will give you their time and chat with you about their experiences. And that's also a way to ask them about where they work and how much that PhD is valued. Because some companies don't value the PhD. Other companies do value the PhD. So you can also ask some questions around that, like what's it like to work at your company? And do you find that the PhD is valuable there? And, if I interview there, like what should I be focusing on? What should I be pitching? How should I talk about my past research? You can actually talk to people about that.
I just wanted to bump the UXPA mentorship program mention. I was matched with a mentee and we're matched based on our interests and stuff, so it's not really just random assignment or who you happen to come across. It's very well put together, so that's a good resource for the next round, I guess, of when that happens.
Great. So great plug to UXPA. Also, we do have some members that are curious about any challenges that you guys may have faced making the transition. So I know I was talking, Amy was just saying like, hey, she had a person who could sit with her and, didn't make her feel uncomfortable for certain things that she did not know. It seems like earlier when we were talking about the research and the transition, like from a higher level, you guys have a skill set as researchers. And so to kind of go into UX, the transition was a bit more smoother. Were there any other like challenges that you guys faced that you can share?
Yeah, one challenge that I faced this, sorry, we'll probably all say yeah. One little one that I didn't necessarily expect was the second job I applied for. So when I went from Chicago to San Francisco to apply at a startup, I almost got rejected. Didn't even get an interview because one of the people on their team thought that I would be too academic and too slow moving and not able to work at a startup having a PhD. Interestingly, that person had a PhD themselves. So that was kind of a weird bias they had. And luckily someone else, I guess, advocated for me and they brought me in and they found out that I was fine. But that might be a challenge you'll have to overcome, is proving, trying to find ways to show that just because you have a PhD doesn't mean you're going to take like 5 years to study a problem, right? You don't have to, we don't have to do that all the time. Just for the PhD, then we can stop.
So just for the PhD.
Yeah. So I was going to say a similar thing, that learning, it's not really learning, I guess it's learning. So it's learning how to do projects really fast, right? Like in a PhD program, you learn how to be really thoughtful, how to do really rigorous research, how to think about it from all different angles. And industry just moves way too fast to work that way. I'm a big proponent of bridging academia and industry, and I think we need to do more of that, where industry folks are working with the academics who are doing the really rigorous research, and academics are learning about the problems that industry is solving. But as a person in industry, we move so fast. So I've seen many people get stuck in interviews when the questions are around like, design a study and how long would this take? And okay, so that's your like ideal timeline. Now imagine you only have 3 weeks. What would you do? And people just get stuck. They're like, absolutely not. There's no way this can be done in 3 weeks. But that's reality. Like in industry, we move that fast. So it's really important to think about all the rigorous research that you've learned how to do. You've learned how to do it really well. What would you cut and what are the repercussions of cutting various things? You have a really condensed timeline. How can you modify your research plan, your project, and still have results that you are confident about, that you can then go back to the team and say, here's what we learned and here's what it means, and know what you've sacrificed. So like it's just kind of a different way of thinking about still how to do really good research. Like that's what you're bringing to the table with all your training. So you still want to do that really good research, but how can you make it now work in industry?
Mm-hmm.
A challenge that I continue to have, and this may be a little bit personal to me, although I suspect there's elements of it elsewhere, is my writing style is sometimes commented on as being very academic, even when I think I've made it much more conversational. But we're all trained in this very formal style of writing where everything that we say gets referenced, and we need to make sure that it is absolutely correct. I mean, the wording can be very important if you're trying to convey the results of other research that's been done. So, there are times that I'll make deliberate word choices because I'm going for that accuracy, but it may not be the way that a person would talk in conversation. And so my colleagues might react to that and say like, that sounds kind of formal. Like, do you really want to say that? So that's been an ongoing negotiation. I think on the whole, it's been a really positive thing for me to work on communicating in a more conversational way, because a lot of times that's what the projects that I work on require. But there have also been times where I have asserted myself and said, in this case, I hear you, but it's really important that I do communicate it this way because the accuracy is so important here.
I was also going to talk about the writing piece because I think that's huge. Writing is a huge part of academia, and learning how to write well so that everything, like every word has a purpose. And essentially, and you're taught to write concisely, but you also have a lot to say, in every sentence to be complete also. So yeah, that was huge to try to back away from that enough that people could not understand, but people would be willing to read what I put together. But similar to that is also reporting style. So even if it's very similar research to academic research, like a usability study or something, the way I report that is very different. So I do have an executive summary at the beginning. That's 1 page with bullet points, but then, and a lot of times that's all anyone's going to read. But the actual meat of it is also listed beyond that, so that if in 10 years someone goes back to it and wants to do another study, they know what I actually did and what I found and the specifics of that. But so part of that is just understanding who's going to be benefiting from your research and how to communicate to them, which is probably different than how you would communicate to an academic audience.
Yeah, the audience, for sure.
Yep. Sometimes I get, sorry, I just wanted to comment on kind of the flip side of that. Sometimes I get sad that I'm not doing more of the academic research. I long for it. It's we move so fast in industry. I want to do, quote unquote, a lit review. I want to see what everybody else has done on this thing that I'm studying. Guaranteed there are publications out there, but we're just moving so fast. I don't have time to do that. And that pains me sometimes. I don't know, maybe that means, maybe the pendulum will swing and we'll have room for PhD researchers on our team who are still doing that kind of research. We go to them and say, find everything on this topic because, we're just moving really fast, carrying out the studies. I don't know, maybe those of you who already have your businesses, maybe that's something to think about.
I've actually
been want to pay for it.
That's true. That's true.
I've been really lucky I was gonna say I've been really lucky that I've had a few clients who have asked for lit reviews. So I've which is just my dream. It's getting paid to read and then write a little report. It's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, we do a lot of lit reviews actually at MadPow, and we do projects that have a behavior change design component to it. That's one of the things I really like about working here because it makes sure that we build a knowledge of previous research into what we're doing. We're not starting from scratch. So
yeah, that's a good point actually. So maybe that kind of, when you think about where you want to work, if that's something that you're still interested in, seeking out a company that does that type of work. Because actually back when I was at Forest Marsh Group, it was similar. We did a lot of lit reviews for clients, but since then I haven't really been doing anything like that. So yeah, it's something to think about when you're looking for your, where you're going to be.
And Jen, I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier when we were talking about so many different people are coming into UX. And I know one of our members was interested specifically in getting work experience and transitioning from a totally different sector. So I know you guys have research degrees in, whether it's behavior change or psychology, how, what advice would you have for someone who may be a research scientist, who perhaps the research is not necessarily as closely related to the behavior in UX? How can they transfer those skills to career in UX as well, if you guys have any advice on that?
Yeah, I think identify one way is to find, and again, you can do this through a mentor or from LinkedIn, or from, I always recommend attending those local meetups. There's so many these days. So going to the conferences, attending the meetups, getting to know the people in the field, where people are working, the types of projects they're working on. Start to build those relationships, start to build your network. And in person is always better. I know I've mentioned LinkedIn a couple times. In person is always better. So like find those local meetups and really start to attend those and, you know, build these relationships. And then finding that person or that organization that has, like, you could basically get your foot in the door. So let's say maybe it's like a MadPow type of company or Forrest Marsh Group where they do lots of different types of research. You want to do UX research, but there you could get your foot in the door because you have experience doing a different type of research. And then once you're in, then you can switch over to, you know, the UX team, something like that. Even at Facebook, people had done that. Like you can come in as a, you know, working more like on design, but then switch into UX. You could come in as a UX researcher, but then switch into being a PM. You know, so working at a company where there are lots of opportunities, where you can get your foot in the door with the experience you have, you know, that is one way you can do it. And it might mean, the sacrifice might mean you're not going to be a 100% UX researcher next week. Like you might have to wait a year because you right now, like there's a plan, right? Right now you need to get your foot in the door. You're going to spend a year doing the thing you're currently doing, but at a company where there are other opportunities. And then after that year passes, now you have a reputation at the company, a good reputation. You've, you know, been doing a lot of quality work, and now you can switch into something else. So that's one strategy.
Yeah, and that's actually how I got into it. I didn't mention this before, but when I started at that startup where I began working on UX, I actually hired in as a content strategist, which is also not what I'm trained in, formally speaking, but it was a clearer, because writing is such a big part of the PhD education, I was able to make that case pretty clearly. And they also did have a performance part of the interview. I had to do a writing assignment as part of my application, which I was able to do really well given my training. But once I got into the organization, I pretty quickly switched roles. And it was a mix of them recognizing the skills that I had being a good fit for other roles and me realizing these other roles existed and that they were really cool and I wanted them.
Great, great. Well, that was good advice. I am going to switch. It looks like I've been manning the chat, and it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in yet. But
We
I kind of want to.
Oh, no, I see several.
Yeah, they're in the questions tab.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so here are the questions. So it looks like we have one person. They will love to ask, like, how is a psychologist's UX portfolio? What does that look like? It seems that you guys have a lot of experience, and we have some juniors on the line that would like some advice on that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from the three of you and what your perspective has been, you know, personally, but then also when hiring people, because my advice is always designers have portfolios. They need to show product, right? Like they need to show their artwork, what they've created. Research is a little bit different. You know, we might have a research paper that we published in grad school, right? We might have some slides from a previous project we worked on, if we're allowed to even share that, you know, with client privacy and things like that. But oftentimes we don't have like a portfolio per se. It's more of a resume. Like you have a really good, or CV if it's, you know, more lengthy. And it really showcases what you know how to do. And my recommendation is always, don't just say, this is what I work, like this was the project, or, you know, this is the title of the project, that type of thing. The team did this type of thing. I always say, make sure you indicate what you did. What was your role? What was your impact? What was the impact? Like as a result of you being there, what was the outcome? And then what was the outcome of the project? Like was there change as a result of your research? Like what then occurred? And make sure to succinctly lay that out as a UX person would do, right? Not in like paragraph form. But that's what I always mention when people ask me about portfolios, because in our world, even honestly, even more senior level folks, sometimes we can't share our clients' work. So we often don't have a portfolio. It's more the succinct resume. And then we tell our stories. We talk about the projects we've worked on, the approach we've taken, and then again, like what that impact was from start to finish.
Totally agree. And a lot of my career has been working for pharma clients who have an additional layer of confidentiality around a lot, and now financial services too, same sort of thing, like highly regulated environments, and they really, for the most part, aren't able or willing to share the work product that you work on. So totally agree with Jen that the storytelling is paramount. one of the things that I did, I think I started this like maybe 5 years ago now, but I started my own website and blog as a way to more informally talk about some of the things that were on my mind related to psychology and UX and research. And honestly, a lot of the things that I've posted on there are a little bit on the goofy side, like they're not super serious analyses, and they don't really reflect what I was doing at work. It might just be like, oh, hey, this would be a great example to communicate this concept to someone who doesn't have a background. But I've found that over the years that I've had it, that blog has actually been a really useful thing, like an artifact that I can point to if somebody's interested in what I do. There are certain posts that I can go back to and say, hey, this is actually a representative example of the way that I think about something. So that sort of informal project on your own could be a way to start to tell those stories.
Totally, and you could do it with Medium. Now so many folks are on Medium, like it's a great avenue to be sharing the way you approach problems. Yeah, the way you think about things.
I've also noticed, I don't post on LinkedIn a lot, but if I do, those posts tend to get a lot of interaction. It seems like the audience on LinkedIn is very engaged.
So I similarly don't have a portfolio. I've been trying to work on like making case studies, so I find that sometimes clients want to see them, so that's fine. But I would say that for people who are just kind of thinking about transitioning from academia to UX, one thing that you can do is be really good at explaining your academic research in like a few sentences in a way that someone who wants to hire you for a job will understand. You should be able to, like, if you can take your dissertation or your master's thesis or whatever and explain it relatively quickly in a way that an average person can understand, then that will help give them a signal that you actually can make it out in the real world, and that you will be able to translate research findings into something that clients can consume or other people at the company can consume. So practice your elevator pitch, I guess, for your PhD or master's.
One time I was actually offered a job that I didn't take because my website had like a page with my different research projects just broken down into like bullet points. And just having that skill, to be able, and it's not a portfolio. I mean, it's our version of one, I guess, it's describing very succinctly what a project was when we can. Again, like just the fact that oftentimes we can't talk about our work because it's confidential. But to the extent that you can, just put it out there. It doesn't have to be a portfolio the way you think of a visual design portfolio, because that's not the work we do.
Absolutely. I was going to ask, and it looks like, again, just taking some of the questions from the participants, our members who are attending. Have you guys uncovered any valuable skills to UX that you did not necessarily obtain from academia?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Amy.
I mean, at this point, I've learned as much on the job as I've learned in my academic training. So now I have to think of a specific idea, I suppose, or a specific example. But I mean, all right, so I mentioned communication before, and that feedback that I can be a very academic communicator. Well, I've also learned how not to be a very academic communicator, and that's been on the job training. So I can put together, I can communicate all about a study in PowerPoint, a format you do not use as an academic, and, do the executive summary and make that description make sense to an audience that doesn't have a research background and doesn't necessarily care about all the reasons why, we chose this methodology and worded this question this way. I would actually also add that slide design, presentation design, is a super valuable skill that I've picked up on the job. I've had the opportunity to go to a couple of academic conferences recently, and I always have this sort of like sense of my own shortcomings working in a design agency as a non-designer. In terms of producing beautiful things, I'm definitely on the lower half here. But I'm sitting in this academic conference looking at the slides going, oh my gosh, like I am the Picasso of slides in this world. I just, being able to lay out the information that you're talking about in a visually pleasing way that guides your audience, helps them stick with your story instead of distracting them with extra text or being irrelevant. That is a skill, and it's a skill that I've learned entirely outside of academia.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I've actually seen some industry folks who will then pitch talks at academic conferences about how to present findings, how to present slides. Like, you see those slides that's like all text, and us as UXers, we look at that and just like cringe, right? But yeah, that's certainly something. The other thing is loosely like working with others. In academia, you have your team, you know, and your advisor, like others, but it's very different. It's very different. Like in industry, you're working there. I guess it's like kind of like that business side of things, you know, which I've always been drawn to. But you're working with not just like your manager and your research peers, but now you're also engaging with the content strategist and the designer and the developers and the PM, you know, or your client stakeholders, like all these different people, and you need to do that, you know, well. You're providing a service. It's not quite sales, but kind of like you're working with these people, and you need to understand what their questions are and what their concerns are, and then you need to be able to go back and share findings with them in a way that makes sense to them, that they understand, that they value, so they continue to call upon you. So yeah, that was definitely something that was a little bit different.
In particular, yeah, understanding business goals is very important, and understanding how to incorporate that into, you know, your user-focused goals, because sometimes it's a little bit of a balancing act.
Yeah.
And that goes for marketing, that goes for sales, that goes for everything Jen mentioned too. Just understanding how a lot of times we're in a position where we have to take pieces of information from everyone and kind of like pull it together and balance it.
Mm-hmm. I learned early on, and when I was at Forest Marsh, one of my mentors there, one of my bosses, he used to say to me, because I still had the more academic research mindset, and we would do a project, and I would want to do all these different analyses and learn about all these different things because I'm passionate about human behavior. And he would always say to me, think about the deliverable. And that was like, I still do that now when I want to start digging, or even, you know, conducting a survey, like, well, let's ask this question. Then it's like, well, think about the deliverable. Are we even going to use this data? How are we going to use this data? Do the stakeholders care? Like, you might really be passionate about something that's, you know, really deep, but stakeholders are like, I don't care. Like, just give me the takeaway. So, you know, that was also a different way of thinking. And that stuck with me. I still do that now. Like, think about the deliverable.
Excellent. I'm going to take one more question from an audience member. It looks like she said, congratulations to all of you for escaping academia early on. It looks like she's been a tenured professor for several years, and she is an active researcher. She does have concerns about transitioning into UX research and ageism. So do you guys have any advice on either of the two?
So I don't want to say that ageism isn't real. It definitely is. And aside from, I don't know if this is exactly ageism, but one thing that I feel now at my point in life is I will sometimes perceive an organization as being too young for me. Like, especially some of the startup organizations that have that very laid back, informal culture. I just sometimes perceive myself as not being a fit on the basis of age, whether that's true or not. So I don't want to say that that's not real. But I will say that, you know, I know that I myself, when I'm looking for colleagues and the people that I work with, I really love where I work, partly because I think so highly of my colleagues here. You know, we try to be cognizant of not just recruiting people who are exactly like ourselves demographically. I won't say that we've always done a great job at it. I mean, you can look at our website and see that a lot of people do come from the same sorts of backgrounds, but we're really making an effort to get better at that. And I think emphasizing the skills that you bring and your experience is going to help make whoever hires you better at what they do. It is going to make clients happy. It is going to impact results in a positive way. And the more that you can tell that story, I think a hiring organization is a fool not to listen to it. So, you know, it truly is a challenge, but I think that you bring something to the table that will help you to overcome it.
Great, great. And I know we have about 2 minutes left. We always want resources. So resources, books. I know Jen mentioned Medium earlier as a possible resource. Are there any kind of books or online resources that you guys could recommend?
I mean, if it's just like resources for like, okay, so if you haven't dug into UX research stuff yet and you want to get a sense of that, then like Erica Hall's book, Just Enough Research, is a great start. Steve Portugal's Interviewing Users is another good kind of intro book. Design of Everyday Things is another kind of classic.
There are some podcasts out there if that's more your style. So there's a mixed methods podcast that, especially if you come from academia, there's a lot of good information there. There's a podcast called User Defenders, which is Jason Ogle interviewing a bunch of different, he calls them superheroes, but UX superheroes, but people who are involved in the field, and it's just talking about some kind of like day-to-day stuff and how they got started and what they do and that kind of thing. So sometimes hearing those like personal stories, I enjoy that. So if that's more your style, there's stuff like that.
And there's a Slack channel for UXPA International, and then I live in Boston, so I'm in the Slack channel for UXPA Boston. I assume that other local chapters also have that. And those can be a good resource to reach out to people for specific recommendations or to view what they've already posted on the channel and see what they're reading.
Great.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned UXPA chapters. There's tons of meetup groups these days, even outside of UXPA. There's tons of conferences, like really getting out there and seeing, not just meeting people and networking, which is really valuable in our fields, but also just hearing about the types of projects people work on. You go to conferences, and after 3 days at any of these events, like you've learned so much just about the types of problems people are tackling and how other researchers are thinking about these problems, which I think could be really valuable if you're looking to get into the field.
Okay, great. We are actually a minute over time, but I definitely want to thank all of you guys for attending. This was really, really helpful. And again, to our audience and attendees, please check the UXPA website for upcoming short courses and webinars. Again, we have a mentorship program and our international conference coming up. So thank you guys for attending. The recording will be available soon. All right. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.
I thought I was like, do we wait around? I guess not.
I don't know. All right.
Good to
Bye.
see you guys. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.